Second Eclectic Radical Saturday special. Today, my very special guest is Sabrina Salvati, who I'm pleased to have join me. She is a more successful and better known YouTuber than I am, but for some reason, I have a bigger Twitter following. I have my suspicions why, and you guys need to do better. You guys should definitely follow her at Sabby Sabs 2 on Twitter, please. I will put it in the chat room. How are you doing today, Sabrina?
I'm doing good, all things considered.
Yeah, all things being quite a lot. No, I put that in wrong. I hate it when I do that. Sabby Sabs 2. That's right, yes? If I have it wrong, please let me know. That should be in comments. That'll be on the right. I just want to make sure I have that right now.
Yep.
Cool. I knew I got it wrong the first time. Thank you. But yeah, no, it's very hard with the news lately. I was just getting ready for something bad to happen in the George Floyd case when the Brooklyn Center stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's insane. And when they finally let the video come out, no, I'm sorry. I don't accept any of the official excuses. I wasn't convinced by her yelling taser when everybody could see the gun in her hand, and I didn't see any reason for her to be pulling a taser in the first place. Did you?
No. But the thing is this happens more often than people realize. You know, we hear about it more now because people have smartphones. People can record, people can go live like on Facebook, and they're capturing these things happening. But it happens more often than people realize. Like, I remember, being a kid and going to visit my grandma in Baltimore. And man, I got some police stories about Baltimore if you ever want to hear. But I remember police officers walking up to a guy. The guy was standing next to, we used to call them corner stores, the store on the corner. And he was standing next to the corner store. Police officers got out of the car, went up to the guy, asked him why he was there, asked for his ID. And I was just a kid at that time. And I was thinking to myself, like, why are they bothering him? Like, asking my parents, like, why are they messing with that man? And, my parents had to have the talk with me at a young age. And they were just convinced that this guy was causing trouble, and he was not causing trouble. I remember the police like handcuffing him and taking him away. He wasn't selling drugs. He wasn't doing he was not breaking the law. But it's like they will just pick with people sometimes. I've seen that happen in places like Baltimore. And I think the thing is, if you don't experience that, if you're not living in, like neighborhoods where this is happening, it can be hard to believe it, right?
It really can. And I know that I have some atypical experiences for a white person. You see how I look. When he was my age and younger, my dad looked like this. One of my parents' favorite stories is on a vacation when I was a kid, and I sort of remember some of the details because I'm maybe 3. So it's like the early memory sort of stuff where you can sort of remember some of it when your parents talk about it. But anyway, they were coming back into the U.S. from Canada, and because my dad looked like this and my mom still had long hair, the border cops gave them a hell of a time because they thought they were hippies from the 60s or the 70s trying to sneak back into the country. So it was really confrontational and scary for my parents, who were not really expecting it. But because they were hippies, I also got the talk, which I don't think most white kids get. They gave me lots of talk about their experiences with cops as hippies.
Yep.
Which, is there's some history there, especially in California, which is where my parents were from. And so one of the things that I was taught early on, and it's something I think that more white people should talk about, is my dad said to me, the only difference between the cops and all the other gangs is which side of the badge they're on.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, cops back each other too.
Yes. This George Floyd trial with all these cops testifying against a cop. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
No.
I mean, I hate to seem heartened or happy by anything cops do. It seems tremendous, like a tremendously low bar, since this is something they should have been doing all along. But I've never seen cops testify against cops before. I'm impressed that they are. I'm impressed that the media is talking about cops testifying against cops. That's amazing. That never would have happened when I was a kid. And as depressing as my show sometimes gets, that's actually a good thing that that finally pushed its way through to the media. But then I remember that I'm 44 years old and it was 30 years since I was a kid. So that pisses me off all over again.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you think back to like Rodney King, that didn't happen.
I
And
was
that
in
was on
Southern
video too.
California. I was in Southern California still, Upland, California, when that happened. Because of where the National Guard comes from, the National Guard was going all the way down the 10 freeway through my hometown to get to Los Angeles to occupy after the Rodney King stuff. What we had stuff actually going on near the freeway in some parts of Upland and Pomona, though it was low key stuff, and it was mostly white people yelling at cops, which I don't have. I like to see that. It doesn't happen enough. But yeah, that was the same thing that's happening now in Minnesota. They sent in the National Guard. People act shocked that a city is under military occupation, and they don't remember that that's exactly what Poppy Bush did.
Yeah. No, like I agree. I mean, I think that you know, it was the people though. It was the people. The reason why we're seeing like cops like testify against other cops, because the people in Minneapolis, the people around the world rose up.
Yes.
And that's what it's going to take. And that's one of those things that I wish the protest didn't stop. Like that was one of those things I was like, I wish people were still like doing, you know?
So I will speak up here because this is important. This is something I've been trying to draw at least some attention to. Chuck Modi has been trying to draw some attention to this at Chuck Modi 1 on Twitter. The protest didn't stop. They have been protesting cops in Portland and in DC and in other places around the country nonstop since that first round. There are people in DC who have never stopped protesting and are still doing it. There are people here in Portland who all they really did was switch the protests from the police directly to ICE. They're still the same people protesting the same authoritarian structures. So people are still protesting. What's happening is the media is not spending all its time covering it anymore.
It's true.
The people who are sharing the protest news are mostly, independent journalists or people who do one kind of journalism as a day job and another kind of journalism on their time off. Like Chuck Modi is a sports writer when he's working for a living, but he shares great stuff from DC protests.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that like we definitely need to continue that. And we need to have these conversations. That's why I appreciate like you having this discussion, because I do realize like these are not easy things to talk about.
They're not. And I don't want to give people a break. I'm not trying to let everybody off the hook by saying this at all. It's particularly hard for white people who weren't raised by hippies to have any sort of framework for what cops really do or how cops really interact with the majority of people. They don't have. I don't like to use the word privilege. I've been talking to people who say that social dominance is a much better word than privilege. But too many white people of middle class or better are just in a position of social dominance relative to the rest of us. They never have a bad experience with cops. Some of them even have good experiences with cops, which I personally have not ever had. But, it happens. But because of that race and class identity, you really have to break through. You really have to make people aware of what's happening. And some people don't want to be aware of what's happening. There are white people who literally feel safer when they see cops kill black people. That's why it happens.
Yep. No, it's true. I know that I think most people know this, but my husband is white. And my husband was telling me about a time when he was pulled over by the police for speeding. And he's always told me not once in his life was he afraid when he was pulled over by the police. He never had a reason to be afraid. And he realizes that for Black people, it's just not that way.
It's not. And it's not by design. I know everybody says this on every show, but you can't beat it to death with a rock enough. The policing in our system in most of the country started either as a deliberate attempt to keep an eye on slaves when they weren't working, or to catch them when they ran away, or to police their movements inside urban areas, or in places where there weren't slaves, when the cops specifically to police the immigrant working class for the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant moneyed middle class and ruling class. The cops aren't there to help. The guy whose apartment is burglarized, or the sex worker who's beat up by a John, the cops are there to help the shopkeeper who was robbed, or the rich person who is scared about the element moving into their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of white supremacy also in the police force. And I think people need to be aware of that. Sometimes I think that we think, like, when we talk about like white supremacists, we think of them as like this separate entity. But these are people that have jobs. Some of them are doctors, some of them are lawyers, and some of them are cops. And there's a lot of racism in law enforcement, and there's a lot of racism in the criminal justice system. And I think people need to realize that.
Well, did you know, since we're talking about white supremacy and cops, did you know that there has always been a substantial, not just white supremacist, but actual Nazi presence in the New Jersey State Police Department back almost to its founding?
I did know that. Yep.
Their original uniform was modeled on a South African police uniform that was worn by people who policed the outlying villages where the native Africans lived.
Yeah. Yeah. So a friend of mine who's from New Jersey told me about that when we were in undergrad. And I was like, what? Like, are you serious?
I found out about it by total accident because I recently started reading Assata Shakur's autobiography, and that's she was arrested by the New Jersey State Police and actually had an encounter with a Nazi cop, and that's one of the first things she talks about in the book.
Mm-hmm. It's very present in law enforcement,
and it's not an infiltration. Sorry to interrupt. I shouldn't do that. Not an infiltration. I mean, I understand why they use it. They want to describe the way it sneaks into everything, but it's not an infiltration. The white supremacists are the cops when they're off duty, and the cops are the white supremacists when they're off duty. They're the same people. There is an old saying that goes back past even older than the civil rights movement. Cops and Klan go hand in hand.
Yep. My grandma, grew up in North Carolina, and she used to tell me stories about what it was like living there back during that time, pre-civil rights, and what it was like having churches burned, schools burned, and the police, all of a sudden, this is the way she explained it to me. when things like that happen in the Black community, all of a sudden the police were nowhere to be found.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Police don't investigate that stuff. I mean, Dylan Roof shoots up the church and the police go take him to McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and then somebody else well, the state of South Carolina sentenced him to death. Yeah, but the cops didn't do that. The cops would take him to McDonald's again if they had the chance. Police donated to Kyle Rittenhouse's bail fund. Police donated to Kyle Rittenhouse's legal defense fund. City officials in Kenosha donated to both.
Which shouldn't have even been allowed, by the way.
Well, the fundraising was done on a Christian media site. And what we all know what white Christian media means in certain parts of this country. Well, no, most of this country, I'm not even going to be sectionalist about it. In most of this country, white Christian media means some flavor of white supremacy.
Yep.
I think I think there are possibly some situations of innocent intent, but I don't buy into the intent definition of racism that the conservatives keep wanting to sell people. I don't care whether people have malice in their heart or not. The cops are killing people.
Yeah, I mean, well, it doesn't help when you have people like Candace Owens, people who look like me, who are giving that same message, and people who watch that stuff, and people who are, conservative, and they're like, look, Candace is Black, and she says, George Floyd was in the wrong. They don't realize that, like, Candace is trying to get paid.
Candace derailed a congressional campaign in California already. A really great candidate was trolling Candace Owens and made the misjudged remark. I'm not sure how inaccurate it was, but I'm not sure that it's the sort of thing people who look like him or me should be speculating on either. He made the misjudged remark that in his opinion, Candace Owens was a race traitor. And because he was white, a whole lot of people jumped on him immediately and called him racist, and he ended up dropping out of his campaign. So, wow. And he was the Democratic Socialist in that race. The seat is held by a Republican. The person who ran as a Democrat the last time, unfortunately, didn't advance past the primary. Hopefully she's not running again, actually supported the Republican for re-election in order to increase her own chances to run again this time. Well, hopefully people are done with her, but.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's like when you have people like that also doesn't help. It doesn't help like people like me that are trying to get this message across that like police officers are doing this to Black people. So It doesn't help when you have people like her and the other guy, Jason Johnson.
Dr. Jason Johnson.
Oh my God. It's just, I'm like, come on, people, like really?
I'm very proud. I'm letting the Twitter discourse into this earlier than I meant to. I am very proud of being blocked by Dr. Jason Johnson. I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud of the fact that the reason he blocked me was because it was in a conversation where other people were being mean to me, and I was trying to ask him these tough, factual questions, and he blocked me so that he could clout chase off the people being mean to him.
Oh my gosh, yeah. A bunch of us last week were blocked by Benjamin Dixon.
Oh, I got blocked by him very quick. He and I used to follow each other. He and I used to be in some of the same group DMs. I used to try to feed him stories. I used to try to give him heads up on stuff. I really had a lot of respect for Benjamin Dixon, despite some of the crap he had pulled when he was supporting Warren before he came over. Mm-hmm. But he blocked me and then and then tried to clout chase off blocking me after I told him, you need to cool off just a little bit talking about Trump right now and start talking a little bit more about some of these cabinet picks, because you're letting them set the narrative about who's being put in charge of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense.
Yeah, well, they don't know what to do now. They don't know what to talk about now because Trump's not president anymore. And I think a lot of people have seen like a drop in ratings and subscribers and things like that as well. So they don't know what to talk about now. So it's like, let me just continue to talk about Trump because that's what's been getting me views all this time.
Nice thing about being a crazy anarchist is I always have something to talk about because I can just bitch about everybody because they all suck so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Biden. He didn't increase the refugee quotas. He ran on increasing the refugee quotas.
Mm-hmm.
He ran on the argument that not increasing the refugee quotas was both white supremacist and cruel to our allies. And he didn't even increase the refugee quotas from Afghanistan, our ally.
Nope.
It's like, how are we supposed to take, again, because I'm old, one of my first memories of detailed politics is, the 84 and 88 presidential elections. And in 87, Connie Chung called Joe Biden a pathological liar, using exactly the same language that Bernie Sanders used to describe Donald Trump years later. And she was right then, and she is still right now. Mm-hmm. And no one should ever believe anything he says just because he says it. And I don't understand how who Biden is was so magically flushed down the memory hole, even with him being Barack Obama's cuddly grandpa vice president. I still don't get it.
No, I mean, we were talking about this yesterday with Fred Hampton Leftist. It's like, Biden really had the Obama factor. A lot of people still like Obama for whatever reason. So that really helped him a lot. But if it wasn't for that, like this was the third time Biden was running as president, right? If he did not have that connection to Obama, he would not be president right now.
No, he was losing. He had not won a single primary. He had not come in better than like third, I think, anywhere. Maybe he had a distant second somewhere, maybe not, but I don't think so. Bernie had blown everybody out in Nevada in a way nobody expected because the union stuff had been so corrupt in 2016. And the union deciding to stand up to their leaders in 2020 just made me so happy. I thought it meant we were going to win. When the Nevada union stood up to their leadership and voted for Bernie, I thought it meant we were going to win. And then everything fell apart. And it was because that was the moment where, Jim Clyburn and Barack Obama and a few other people decided, okay, nobody else is pulling out ahead. It's got to be Joe or it's going to be Bernie.
And the thing about that, too, the fact that Obama was just able to just make a call, like whether you're left or right or in the middle, everybody should have a problem with that.
They should.
Like, that's very scary. That a former president can pick up the phone and make a call and say, Pete, Amy, drop out so Joe can win.
Here's what's really scary about it. In previous elections, people have pushed figures like Eisenhower to come out and speak up and take part in a primary. All the Stop Goldwater people were desperate for Eisenhower to speak up and involve himself in that 1964 presidential primary and pick Nixon or Romney or even Nelson Rockefeller, who they didn't really like, instead of Goldwater, so that person would win at the convention instead of Goldwater. Because a lot of establishment Republicans were scared of Goldwater the same way that they were scared of Trump before he won. And he wouldn't do it. Eisenhower said, "It's not my job to interfere in the primary." Truman refused to interfere in the Democratic primary. He wasn't going to let them replace Johnson on the ticket with somebody else, the way they wanted to. They wanted Truman to basically step in and not let Johnson run and replace him with somebody who was more like Kennedy. And it wasn't, and Truman didn't want anything to do with it. And so in the past, presidents have specifically refused to do this. W refused to do this. He finally spoke out a little bit, like near the very end, saying, no, I don't like Trump. But he didn't involve himself in the primary at a position where it mattered, at least not after his brother dropped out.
Yeah, but that tells you about the power that Obama has.
Yes. And he specifically chose to use it. He chose to use it at a time when no other president has meddled that blatantly in their party's primary after they left office.
Yeah. I mean, it's just in the way that Biden won, like, don't get me wrong, like Trump was crazy. Okay. Like I couldn't stand Trump, but the way that Biden won, it sucks because he was able to get Georgia. He was able to get Arizona. He turned Georgia blue. And it kind of sent this message, well, not to us, but to, establishment Dems, that this is how you win with an establishment candidate.
And I'm going to tell you my opinion. Well, actually, no, I'm going to ask your opinion because I want to know yours. I know mine. Do you think Biden wins that election without coronavirus and the media constantly painting Trump as to blame for everything?
No.
I don't either. I think that coronavirus specifically won the election for Biden. Mm-hmm. That the biggest reason for his victory was the belief that he would save more lives than Trump, that he would act with seriousness about the issue. Yeah. Now, do you see anything to seriously distinguish Biden's coronavirus policy from Trump's?
No. But notice how, like, after Biden won, people were like celebrating in the streets. People were like dancing like in Times Square and all this stuff. Notice how with mainstream media, all of a sudden, nothing about COVID.
Yeah. Well, they're talking about Brooklyn Center under Biden in a totally different way than they were talking about Minneapolis under Trump.
Yep.
They're not talking about the horrible National Guard occupation of Brooklyn Center. They're not talking about the National Guard randomly shooting people, but they're still doing those things the same way they did them in Minneapolis.
Yep. Because they want us to feel like everything's fine now because Trump's out.
Yes, that's exactly how they want us to feel. They want us to ignore the people who are still being hurt and killed.
Yep. But I knew that this would happen, though.
I did too. Doesn't make me less angry. I mean, knowing that it was going to happen does not make me less angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a problem that a lot of people have too, is where are they going to focus all this energy and anger now? I think that we really need to be supporting people who are protesting cops. I believe we need to be aggressively protesting cops, whether the media comes or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that those of us who have some sort of media platform should be talking about the folks who are protesting cops.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have to keep that up. And we shouldn't just do it. This is another thing too. We can't just do it when we hear one of these situations is on mainstream news. We can't wait for another like George Floyd.
Well, there's one that snuck through. And the fact that it snuck through goes to show you the kind of narratives that the media wants to tell, even though the media's cop narrative is still mostly anti-cop, at least in its basics. Though then they turn around and get pro-cop in all sorts of weird ways in the sub-thread, so to speak. But so you have this you have this sense in the media that something has to change, and there's definitely a problem with the cops, and that these police shootings are definitely bad. But there's no, and you're starting to see the challenge break through even from other cops. But when Rashida Tlaib said no more police, not one person stood up for her. Not one person in Congress. Not AOC, not Ayanna Pressley, not Ilhan. Bernie said out loud that he disagreed with her, which is like,
Yeah. Bernie's moving towards the center.
Well, Bernie has always. I love Bernie. I don't want to trash Bernie. I don't want to say I think Bernie's a sheepdog the way a lot of people do, but he has that effect on people. And he sees himself in that role, but he doesn't see it as bringing people to the Democratic Party. He seems as bringing people into politics, and he thinks that something can change if he gets enough support somewhere. But I mean, what happens is we end up getting more people who support the Democratic Party, and he's too conservative on cops. He's a middle class guy who thinks cops are working class people and doesn't understand that no, cops are bosses. They're all our supervisors when we're not working.
But Bernie should know better, because he was involved in several protests when he was younger, and there's that photo of him being dragged away by the cops.
Yeah, but it's so one of the things that people who are of a Marxist-Leninist background complain about a lot is what they call bourgeois radicalism, which is this desire of these young rich folks to want to make the world better and to rebel against their elders with this aggressive sort of left-wing politics and fighting for justice. And then as they settle into their economic comfort and fully establish themselves in the establishment and power structures that they were born to and raised to, then that goes away and they're just another liberal. That happened with the founders of Students for a Democratic Society. Tom Hayden started out as a Maoist who writes these really blistering screeds against capitalism, and who strikes the part from their original constitution saying that they won't allow communists to join because he thinks it's discriminatory and wrong to exclude communists from a liberation organization. And then he becomes another liberal Democratic congressman. And you can talk about specific people in Congress who were once very, very radical Black Panthers, and who are now disappointingly liberal often enough to make us groan a little. And it really does come from if somebody becomes comfortable with their class status, they're willing to sort of forget a lot of their former aims, I guess is the best way to put it, especially if they feel like nothing much is going to happen anyway. Well, we haven't been able to succeed, so maybe I can do some good with this money. And who's ever done good by joining the establishment?
Right.
At the very best, and I love Bernie Sanders. The best Bernie has ever done is mitigate harm and win fights over pennies. And I'm glad that someone is fighting over the pennies and mitigating the harm. But we need better than that.
It's true. Somebody I was thinking about recently who I felt like they didn't use like their celebrity status to fight against like criminal justice and police brutality was Michael Jordan. I know when I was growing up, Rodney King, especially Rodney King, Michael Jordan was very quiet on those issues. Now, today, he speaks more about it now, but back then, he was so silent. And I remember just thinking, like, how could you not? You have this large platform. Everybody in the world knows who you are. Like, how could you not speak
Yep.
on this? And that's one thing I will say about LeBron James. LeBron James talks about it. He doesn't care. He's just like, whatever, you know? Um, but I that was one thing one person I felt like in particular I was disappointed by, like growing up, that he was silent on those issues.
We need more athletes like Bill Russell and Colin Kaepernick, and fewer athletes like Michael Jordan and Willie Mays. I'm sorry, Willie Mays was a great player, but he was too politically go along with the tide at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other people too, and there's always going to be people who are, they get class comfortable.
Yep.
And I think that should almost be a new piece of theory that someone should add in to everything else is class comfort, because that really seems to make a difference. It seems to be what splits us politically, whether it's the left or whether it's the Democratic Party or whether it's a group like the DSA or any group you care to think of. And as an outsider, it seems like this is a big problem in other communities that the Democratic Party benefits by not addressing, which is the idea that we can ignore class conflicts between Black groups or class conflicts between Latino groups because the racial solidarity is going to come first, and we don't have to worry about class. But people exploit other people if they're able to do so. Even if it's not deliberate, they are forced to exploit other people to succeed in capitalism, and people are told that they are supposed to be successful, that success in capitalism is what makes them good Americans and proves they're as good as everybody else. I know that's what they told us poor white kids too, that you have to, if you're successful, then your social betters will accept you because you're successful.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I know, like, Ryan Knight came onto my show and he talked about capitalism and how like the government, it's like they want us to focus on, Democrat versus Republican, when we really should be focusing on the whole class issue. So we're distracted by that, and we don't focus on the fact that, there's the 1% at the top, like Bernie talked about this a lot, and there's all these people at the bottom.
So there are three groups. I'll give you my class theory in a nutshell. You got three groups. The very top, you have the 0.01%. That's billionaires. They own, more than half of everything, despite there being so few of them. So let's call them landlords. That's nice. That's simple. That's easy. They own all the property and they make money off it by owning it. So they're the landlords. They're at the very top of the pyramid. And then you got bosses. And the bosses are all the people who run things for the landlords. They're cops. They're bureaucrats. They're politicians. They're corporate executives. They're corporate lawyers. Some of them are college professors. Some of them are doctors. Though there's in all these professions, there are people who are bosses and there are people who are in the bottom group I'm going to get to later. But that boss group is about 10% of society. Well, sorry, 9.99% of society. And then you got the 90%, which is everybody else. And putting it 99 versus 1 actually oversimplifies it in a sense, because it's really that whole 10% at the top that benefits in some way from the exploitation of the rest. And the trick is the overlap between the very highest level of the rest of us and the lowest levels of these landlord and boss classes, where if you can change the only way you're ever going to win democratically is if you can change minds in that lower end. But those are the same people who won't ever side with us until they know we're going to win anyway. So I don't know how much you can rely on democratic politics, especially Democratic Party politics,
right,
to save us right now.
Yeah, we can't. And that's why I tell people, like, the biggest way that you can fight back, besides like a general strike, stop buying their stuff. Chris Smalls was just talking about like his experience at Amazon, what like how the workers were treated at Amazon during COVID, right? Which is insane, not having PPE, all of that type of stuff. So he organized the workers and were like, look, we're going to protest against Amazon, which I believe was the right thing to do.
Definitely.
But as a consumer, stop buying their stuff.
Yes.
After I heard Chris's story, I was like, screw Amazon. I'm not ordering from you anymore.
There are multiple overlapping reasons not to buy from Amazon. The very least that everybody should ever do is never ever buy anything from Amazon itself and only buy things from independent sellers using its platform. Even that is problematic, though, because Amazon watches what independent sellers do and tries to buy them out or steal their crap. So if your independent sellers are too successful, Amazon will try to ruin their business and steer that to them instead.
Yep. That's why I just stop buying their stuff. So my husband and I, we both jointly decided to do this. And it was weird because I forgot what it felt like to say, oh, I need to get when I had to get the microphone. Oh, I need to get a microphone. Let me just jump. Oh, no, we're not ordering from Amazon. Let me get in my car and go to the store and go look at microphones. I forgot what that felt like.
Yep.
Because we're so used to just click ordering things online. And I'm like, like I said, after I heard like Chris's story, I was like, I can't support Amazon anymore.
I'm happy that I didn't get this computer from Amazon. I did get it online, but it wasn't from Amazon. It was directly from the online version of the big box store. If I can help, if I can stay at home and help keep Amazon's competition in business, that's a good compromise for me right now. I don't drive, and my wife shouldn't be driving a lot during the plague. So,
yeah,
but Amazon, no Amazon, if you can possibly help it, please, folks.
No, and I would say that to everybody, especially to African Americans, because we're the largest consumers. Like, stop going to Nike too. Stop buying things from Apple. Stop buying things from all these companies. And one thing I want to say about Nike, you have to be careful with them too, because they, in the past, and actually they're probably doing this now as well, they have had a tendency to exploit Black people and Black issues so that they can get Black people to buy their products.
Well, look at the way they did the partnership with Copernic in order to get all this good. Now, I believe, and we live in a capitalist society. The NFL was depriving Copernic of his ability to make a living in his profession. As a celebrity in the society in which we function, it is perfectly natural for him to then make money off his name, because that's his capital. That's what he has in order to not be exploited himself. I understand that. At least he's exploiting his personal capital and not other people's labor. But it's still problematic to do it with Nike, which runs sweatshops, and so there is that. But Nike was not partnering with Colin Kaepernick because of their deep need to support social justice and fight the power of the NFL. Nike hasn't done anything to get Colin Kaepernick back in uniform playing.
Right. Right. And we see Cadillac is doing it now too. The new Cadillac commercial. Like, I'm just telling people, like, don't fall for that. Like, just don't. They're really trying to get you. Like, just don't fall for that. You know, where were they all this time before?
You know, Cadillac specifically made its money and changing its business model to get black people to buy cars they couldn't afford.
Yep.
They were the poorest selling division of General Motors until they started deliberately and predatorily grifting off the American black community, getting them to spend more money than they could afford on a status symbol that would make white people respect them.
Yep. Yep. So I think that's one of the things that will work if we just stop buying their stuff, because they're going to lose money. Their businesses are going to lose money. And then that means that, you know, the owners are also going to lose money. So stop buying their stuff. And number two is the general strike. And I know there's a lot of talk about it on Twitter, but if there's organizing around that.
I had a show where we hosted a representative of the Revolutionary People's Movement, which is a group trying to get a general strike going. Mm-hmm. It is on the YouTube channel, folks. It includes the link to their People's Manifesto website. I know that there are activists on Twitter, including Awkward, who are trying to get a general strike going, at Awkward Rap. There was at least one vaguely labor affiliated group that had been trying to get things going for a while with intermittent success. They made the mistake of setting a date and nothing really happened. And I think that was, but there are people out there who are trying to do it. We really need to move in that direction. The only way we can do it is by telling people what's going on and educating them about why they need to be angry.
Right.
And scared. I mean, I don't like to scare people. I don't like to talk about the politics of fear. But we have to be angry and scared. We have to be scared enough to understand that we don't have much to lose by fighting back at this point, because if we don't fight back, they're going to take everything from us, starting with the most vulnerable.
Yep.
So one of the things that slipped through the news while they were jumping from one killing to another, Brooklyn Center to Chicago, is that there was a third killing that happened between the two. Police shot a kid at a high school, a black kid, claiming that there was an active shooter on campus when there was not. Mm-hmm. One of the cops actually shot himself in the leg after the fact to justify the shooting, according to the news reporting. So how are we supposed to trust cops? The media did not jump on that one. It was reported in local media. It was broadcast on Twitter by people who follow such things. Mm-hmm. But it was not picked up on by national media. Why is national media not telling us that police executed a person, falsely sent in an active shooter call before executing him, and then one of them shot himself in the leg to cover it up after killing him? Why is that not being reported?
Mm-hmm. They don't want you to know about it. Imagine the outrage of that one.
I know I was outraged when I read it. It's grotesque. That's my new favorite word, is grotesque.
Well, it's one of those things, like Awkward was talking about this as well. Like, oftentimes cops make situations worse.
Of course.
They show up. Yeah. Like they show up to the scene and they don't know how to handle situations. They use excessive force. Like they make things worse most of the time.
It's the cop showed up to an accident that my wife and I were in. Cops should not be responding to traffic accidents. I'm sorry. he did a okay job for a while, but then he's talking to my wife, and my wife points out that our brakes failed, and they discuss that. And then he starts nagging and nagging and nagging my wife about who her mechanic is and who the mechanic who fixed her brakes was. And he makes her really uncomfortable, like the cops are going to go after her mechanic because of a brake failure, and that she may be getting her mechanic in trouble somehow because she was in an accident. And so she shut up and didn't want to talk to them anymore. And I mean, if you're trying to get information about an accident, how does harassing somebody about their mechanic accomplish that?
Right.
He's looking to do something that he knows how to do, investigate a crime, where he's supposed to be responding to an accident.
Right.
And that's that. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you have is a gun, everything looks like a target.
Well, it's like the same thing with George Floyd. For people who are making excuses saying, oh, well, he had drugs in his system. I'm like, let me make something very clear. George Floyd was not arrested for drugs. He was arrested for using a counterfeit bill, which he may or may not have known about.
Most people don't. The majority of counterfeit bills that are passed in retail are passed because someone got them from an ATM in that same store.
Yep.
It's happened to me.
Well, also they said, like, during the trial, the guy who walked in before George Floyd also used a counterfeit bill. So I mean, it's just people use that argument, and Candace Owens is one of those people using that argument. That is not why he was arrested. So just disregard that. Like, seriously, like, the way people just come about with these things to make excuses for police officers, I'm like, that had nothing to do with why he was arrested that day.
It did not. In fact, there's really no. The only reason he was arrested was for the nebulous resisting arrest, which is always popped on anytime the cops arrest somebody that wasn't doing anything wrong. They were always resisting arrest. There's no other reason to arrest them. The only thing they were charged with was resisting arrest, to which my response is, why did you arrest them?
Right.
I would resist. I think I might resist arrest if someone arrested me for no reason. I think to a certain degree that's a rational human response.
Yeah. And when the protests were going on in Atlanta, there were the two college students that I watched on TV. The police officers told, like, get out of the car, get out of the car. They weren't even protesting. And even if they were, they have the right to do that. But they weren't protesting. They were on their way home, I believe. And I hear the officers say, stop resisting. I'm like, they're not even moving. It's
ridiculous. No, it was like when you see the gun pointed right at Dante in that awful video, which I stopped, which fortunately the news that I was watching did not show anything after a certain point, which makes me feel better. But you see that gun, there's no possible way that she could have mistaken that for her taser. Her taser is bright yellow.
Yep.
And that black gun is pointed there, no yellow to be seen, and she's shouting, taser, 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 with no reason to even be pulling the taser. And then she shoots him.
Right.
And with that on TV like that, there's no possible way that anyone could think that this was in any way justified.
No.
At least that's how it seems to me.
Well, they also said that she had been in that department for over 20 years. So how does she not know the difference between her gun and her taser?
So I'm going to be really, really petty here. I have been making coffee for myself and my wife for as long as we've been married, more than 20 years. After 20 years of making and getting coffee for myself and my wife, I can pick up a coffee cup and know by its weight whether or not I or my wife need more coffee. Are you telling me that a cop who has handled her gun and her taser for 20 years can't tell the difference between them as soon as she picks them up just by weight? And honestly, to people who ask me well, it was the heat of the moment. I can only say, the heat of what moment?
Exactly. Exactly. You see, she stepped down. She stepped down very quickly because even she knew, like, this is ridiculous, man.
Mm-hmm. And that's just the Brooklyn Center one.
Mm-hmm.
We got Adam Toledo in Chicago, where he either didn't have a weapon at all, or in the very most pro-cop situation, he had clearly thrown the weapon away and raised his hands to turn around obediently, and was immediately shot for doing exactly what the cops told him to do.
Yep.
And then the excuse is, well, he was startled by the way he turned around. You told him to turn around. You didn't expect him to turn around?
I mean, if you're that afraid, then don't be a police officer.
They're taught to be that afraid. Cops are not taught to be heroic. Cops are taught to be cowards. I watch MSNBC. I watch MSNBC so I can bitch about it and other people don't have to watch it. But occasionally something good is on MSNBC. Whatever other problems he has, Lawrence O'Donnell hates cops. He doesn't do enough about it because he's class comfortable too. Mm-hmm. But he hates cops, and you can tell he hates cops when he talks about it. He hates or at least he hates cops who kill people. He's kind of proud of the fact that his dad is one of the few cops who ever actually arrested other cops for killing black people. So I think he feels better about himself because of that. And so that motivates him to hate cops. And that's good. People should have some sort of motivation to do good. I don't think that certain people will ever do good without that kind of motivation, because that's the only way you're going to get to them, to make them involved with something somehow, to make them feel involved with it. I would not hate Biden lying about his involvement in the civil rights movement nearly as much if he actually did something about civil rights.
Right.
If his lying about the civil rights movement was something that was important to him because he needed to feel good about his relationship with civil rights and make the issue better, fine, lie about it. I don't care. But he's lying about it hypocritically.
Yep. And doing nothing for Black and brown communities. Exactly. I mean, we really have no excuse. We have the House, we have the Senate, we have the presidency, you have a vice president who is, half Black. And they're still doing nothing for Black and brown communities.
Well, you mentioned the vice president. I'm going to come out with one of my favorite pet issues. So Kamala Harris started her career by running for district attorney of San Francisco. The district attorney of San Francisco at the time was a man named Terrence Hallinan. And Terrence Hallinan was the prototype for all these progressive prosecutors you hear of now. During his tenure as district attorney of San Francisco, and he bragged about this, he was proud of this, he had the lowest conviction rate in the country because he wasn't prosecuting a lot of cases. He wasn't pleading people guilty, because if you plead people guilty, that's still a conviction. You still have a conviction rate. So to have a low conviction rate, you have to be letting people go and not prosecuting them. That was why people wanted someone to run against him. And the reason Kamala Harris was chosen to run against them was because he was a white man. And they could say, he's a white liberal and he doesn't understand us, and we actually need more policing. But who was behind Kamala Harris's candidacy? It was chambers of commerce and police unions and other people who did not like that low conviction rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to a certain degree, some of the progressive prosecutors we have now are less radical than they were seen to be when they ran, because they are afraid of someone running a Kamala Harris against them.
Mm. There was a former Baltimore police officer. God, I wish I remember his name, Chris. I have the video saved somewhere, but someone made a documentary interviewing him about his experience being a police officer and why he quit, like why he left law enforcement. White guy. And he was talking about how they were told to go into Black neighborhoods and they were told to look for something. They had to get the numbers. And he talked about like the quotas.
Yes.
And the guy interviewing him at one point said, but one would think that someone has to be doing something illegal in order for you to arrest them. And I'll never forget the statement. He said, but that's just it. They don't.
Which is the point in many cases. So why are there police? This is a question that people don't ever ask, because we just sort of take for granted that there have always been police. There have not always been police. The police force is a very modern thing. 1790s is when London, maybe earlier than that, but the 1700s is when the London Metropolitan Police Department came into being. That's not that long ago in the terms of English history. The first American police departments, the first American police department was in New Orleans, also in the 1700s when it was still Spanish. The Charleston had an early police department that was converted from the Charleston Slave Patrol during Reconstruction. In an ironic reversal of the white killer cop role, several famous gunfighters in Texas got their reputations as gunfighters because they were white people killing black cops. John Wesley Hardin's fame began because he was a white Texan killing black cops in Reconstruction era Texas. Mm. So, I mean, there's all this racial violence coded into it. The Texas Rangers were originally founded when Texas was independent and were no longer a legal entity under Reconstruction, but continued to operate under Reconstruction as a shadow police force that was opposed to the legitimate Reconstruction era authorities. Mm-hmm. Even after Reconstruction was over, the guy who killed John Wesley Hardin was a local cop and sometime drunk and sometime outlaw named John Selman, who was also famous for killing a Texas Ranger named Bass Outlaw in a gunfight. Because while John Selman was working in his capacity as a city policeman, so working in his capacity as a city policeman, he killed a state cop. This is how corrupt the Texas Rangers were.
That's terrible.
And so this stuff like this happened. And then he was also killed by a cop. John Selman was killed in a gunfight with a U.S. Marshal named George Scarborough. So the cops were killing each other in Texas. And it all started with white people not wanting to be controlled by black cops during Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. So nobody supports policing, even in the South. They support a certain kind of policing. All these Blue Lives Matter activists stopped caring about cops when they decided they were going to storm the Capitol.
Yep.
And you can there are all sorts of ways that it's been exaggerated and blown out of proportion, in my opinion, but it still comes down to a real serious understanding of fascism is that when push comes to shove, fascists do not actually believe in anything but getting what they want. They say they support the cops, but if the cops are on the other side,
Yep.
Now the cops are fascist too, and that's the problem, is that we have these layers of fascism in this country. We have the official fascism and the unofficial fascism and the corporate fascism. And we're told it all went away because we elected Joe.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. I haven't heard one Blue Lives Matter person say anything about Officer Sidnick, who was killed in the Capitol. I haven't heard one of them.
I haven't heard anybody say anything about this. I haven't heard any of the Blue Lives Matter people say anything about this other cop who was just killed. The one who was lying in state most recently in that weird attack on the police car at the Capitol gate.
Yep.
What's really weird about that is you would really think people wanted to sell it up because the guy who actually carried out the driving attack is tailor-made for the cops to publicize as a black guy who said he was representing the Nation of Islam. Why didn't the cops play that up more? But they didn't. You're not hearing about it. Capitol Police?
Yeah. I mean, it's all like, oh God, our criminal justice system is so corrupt. Like, look at how long it took, like, the FBI to arrest those people who, stormed the Capitol. Look at how long it took them. The FBI can find anyone. Okay.
So look at the records of cop protests here in Portland during the 2020 election. We had a local election here where we elected a new DA. The FBI was arresting people to file federal charges almost as soon as he announced he wasn't going to prosecute protesters. They could arrest people that fast here in Portland. Why couldn't they arrest people that fast in Washington, D.C.?
Yep.
And the answer is, of course, they could have if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So then we ask, well, why didn't they want to? Well, what did Ron Johnson say? He said, oh, I feel safe. I feel perfectly safe. If they were Black Lives Matter protesters, I might have felt like I was in danger.
Yep.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
And that's full circle, because now we're back to the Republicans, and it's just how little difference there really is. The Democrats put on a better show, but kneeling in kente cloths didn't save anybody else's life.
No, and that was so disgraceful. I'm like, really, guys?
And there was an article. Was it The Intercept? I can't remember whether it was The Intercept or In These Times, but there was a great article. The George Floyd Act would not have saved George Floyd's life.
Right.
Nothing in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act would have saved George Floyd from those cops in Minneapolis. As the cops themselves testified, those kinds of neck restraints were already banned.
Yep.
Chokeholds were already banned on the NYPD when Eric Garner was killed. The NYPD was reformed in the 1970s under John Lindsay before I was born. It was such a big deal at the time. The police union went on strike over it for a week. It was one of the longest NYPD strikes ever. The only crime that went up was running red lights. All the other crime in the city went down. And
it's so crazy.
Cops don't prevent crime. That's the one thing that I want everybody to understand right now. If cops prevented crime, why are politicians always complaining there's too much crime?
Right. No, that's a good question.
And in some cases where the cops have arguably prevented crime. So why aren't we scaling it back now that the crime's been prevented? Now that this neighborhood is safe, why does it still need this police presence? Well, now the police have to create crime to justify their continued existence in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, quotas. The school to prison pipeline started when I was a kid. They got the cops into the schools in the 80s through that DARE garbage.
Yep.
That was the excuse. Just say no. Drugs are an epidemic. How much is getting cops into schools help kids?
It hasn't. I mean, I don't think police officers belong in school systems.
I don't think. I mean, so let's be absurdly reductive for a moment. We don't need militarized cops. We know that. We know we don't need violent militarized cops who look like they're soldiers. Do we need armed cops? Other countries don't.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, you have other countries that they have police officers, but they're not armed, and they have less crime than we do.
And then you can take it a step further if you really want to and say, do we really need cops? If the cops only solve 2% of crimes,
right,
and they visibly don't prevent crime,
right,
and they visibly don't make, so I'll be totally honest here, I will racialize it in a way I normally won't. They visibly do not make the poor white and middle class people that they are supposed to make feel safer actually be safer. They do not actually make those people safer. They just make them feel safer. And on top of that, they still kill black people. Do we need cops?
It's a good point.
I find it hard to justify them based on everything they already don't do. I mean, even if you believe that it really is that bad, how are the cops making it better?
Exactly. They're not. I think what we do need is we need more counselors.
Yes.
We need more like mental health counselors. We should not send police officers to go deal with the mental health situation. This usually ends very badly. They're not trained in that. They don't know what they're doing, and they make the situation worse. So why not put money and funding into that, into mental health counseling, especially like right now during COVID? You know, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are experiencing depression, anxiety, like increase of that.
They're telling us in the news that kids have to go back to school because they're killing themselves, even though COVID, because this depression is so bad, we have to send kids back to school. Who cares about COVID? So if that's true, then we should be, I don't know, making sure school is safe and that kids aren't going to get shot. Right. We should be getting rid of these threats. I mean, it's like we clearly don't care about the things we claim to care about as a society.
No, and another thing that would help like crime go like or help the crime rate go down, we need to put more funding into the school system. You have to ask yourself, like, why are people stealing and why are they doing these things? Because they need the money, because they need that. If you go into a grocery store and you see a kid like taking or stealing groceries, why is he doing that? Because he doesn't have any food and he doesn't have money to buy it.
I'm going to be totally honest here and go out on a limb and say that anybody who's been poor has done something probably that they could have been arrested for and is only not in prison because they didn't get caught.
Yep.
I think that's true. I know that I have done things that are illegal and that I could have gone to prison for if I had been caught at the time. I thought that was necessary for my survival. I don't believe I'm the only one who's felt like they had to make those choices.
Right. I mean, it's instead of like us pointing fingers at people, and this happens on the left and the right sometimes, like
Yeah.
pointing fingers at people and saying, well, this person shouldn't have committed this crime, or ask yourself why. Why are they doing that?
And the answers to me, you've got poverty. So you're poor. You need to commit crime to survive. You've got alienation. You are angry at a world that doesn't care about you if you
Mm-hmm.
and only exploits your need to survive to profit from your existence and doesn't care about you if they can't profit from you. And that's the people who are surviving. They have this alienation that makes them more dangerous to their fellow human beings because of the stress that life puts on them to survive. Then
Mm-hmm.
you've got people who, I don't justify it, you have people who feel scared of losing what they have. And people who feel scared of losing what they have are likely to do criminal things to keep it.
Yep.
And so you've got all these pressures. All of these pressures are created by a toxic class system, a white supremacist and corrupt criminal justice system, and a toxic political system that is funded by the people benefiting from the criminal justice system.
Right. It all goes back to capitalism. I mean, poverty, it's really hard to get out of poverty. And it
And,
doesn't mean you can't do it, but it is really, really difficult to break that cycle.
and my favorite DSA founder quote from Michael Harrington is what he signed at the end of all of his memos for the short time he was working in the White House as a poverty advisor, which was, of course, poverty will always be with us until we abolish the capitalist system. Now, it's really important to understand right now. When you hear people talk about we can eliminate poverty, or we've lifted half of the kids of America out of poverty, or whatever, ask yourself, why is anybody still poor? Why do people have to be poor? Why is there poverty? Poverty creates wealth. Rich people make money off of poor people's poverty. Rich people are richer because poor people are struggling to exist and need to make decisions based on that struggle. And rich people make money off nearly everything that poor people do to survive. Even crime. Some rich person is even making money off you if you commit a crime to get to survive and get caught and go to prison.
Yep.
And I think this is where we say, yeah, we've come full circle. We're back to capitalism, and capitalism is the syndrome. White supremacy is a problem. White supremacy is real, but white supremacy is an intrinsic part of a capitalist system that was looking for free land and cheap labor.
Yep.
And you can't solve some of those problems without facing capitalist need for a permanent underclass.
Right.
And I think we've gone a little bit over where we were planning. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I guess one of the things that like I would say is that, if you are white and you're trying to figure out like, how can I help? Like, cause I used to get that question a lot. And I felt like in the past, I didn't answer that question. And I felt like that wasn't really fair. But if you do want to help with like police brutality, all of these issues that are going on, you can definitely help by, if you can protest, definitely get out there and protest and do so safely. If you cannot protest, you can do exactly what me and Chris just did today, just talking to people and having the discussion.
I want to call some people out because you mentioned something important. I want to say this. I think it's tremendously important that more white people say this. One of the things that Black Lives Matter DC has said in the coverage that Chuck Modi has been doing of their protests in their own time is that all the white people who were with them before Trump won went home after Biden won. And it's very important. I want to say this loudly to my fellow white people. Get out there and show solidarity. People are asking you to protest with them in DC. People are will be asking you to protest that with them in other states. Don't go there and take over. Don't go there and try to make it about you. Certainly don't go there with guns without talking to somebody first. Right. But go there, show solidarity, support people. Solidarity is the opposite of unity. Unity is when someone else asks you to give up your interests to serve the greater good. Solidarity is when you go to someone else and you deliberately put their interests ahead of yours. Right now, we need to show solidarity with Black people fighting the police. We need to back them up. We need to help them. We need to put their interests ahead of ours, because ultimately, if you are a white leftist who wants to see social revolution in this country, then the cops are going to kill you too.
Yep.
I live outside of Portland, Oregon. Here in Portland, Oregon, at a protest, one of the people who did talk to protesters about it beforehand killed a white supremacist in self-defense and was executed by Trump's Justice Department. Be willing to die for people if you have the courage and wherewithal to do it. We are in that stage of the struggle. And now I sound hypocritical, but because I'm a guy on a show. But seriously, we're in that stage of the struggle. I understand that I'm being hypocritical a little bit, but I don't care. We need to be doing that. I need to be doing that myself. I feel like I'm going to keep doing this even if I get arrested. If you can do this, do this. If you can do something else, do it. If you can protest, protest. If you can complain to your boss about the way he treats your Black coworker, do it. If you can complain to a cop in a way that can protect someone else, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I can breathe again. But seriously, thank you for joining us today and for listening to Sabrina and I talk about this stuff. We appreciate it. Follow Sabrina at Sabby Sabs 2 on Twitter. Subscribe to her channel here on YouTube. Retweet our stuff. Help spread truth. The biggest thing that we can do to break through right now is talk to people offline. If you take a Lyft to work, talk to your Lyft driver about communism. They will be a little bit receptive. I have never had a Lyft driver tell me to shut up about communism yet. And that's my last bit of advice for the day. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris.
Totally my pleasure, Sabrina. Thanks so much for coming on. I'm really glad you said yes.